Hi everyone. Hi. You'll notice that yesterday, Tony is 21st century. He just has a teeny little iPad or laptop, whereas I have various sellotaped and stapled and raggedy notes. I think your way's better, neater than mine.
It's okay if you can see it.
You see it, yeah. Thank you, Tony, for a really good talk yesterday. Thank you. Has anybody got, before I start or we start, has anybody got anything that came up from any of the talks or from sitting or any other extraneous matters or intrinsic matters or before I start? Okay. I didn't finish day before yesterday talking about the basics of Buddhism. So I thought I'd just finish that off and then move on to some of the, what I think are the kind of human essentials of the practice. I'm kind of repeating myself over this, over the basics of Buddhism, but I want it to be, it's a kind of ground to start from. So, I think we're all aware that the beginnings and basics of Buddhism are very different, or appear to me to be different than the beginnings of most other spiritual traditions, because it's not based on any revelations. And although it exists as a form of religion, there's a big debate in Buddhism about whether it's a religion or a process. I would call it a religion of human experience, and the Buddha was really, it seems to me, only concerned with the relief of suffering, and he was a real human being, and I suppose Buddhism could be called a human religion. That's what I've highlighted in what I've written. And the Buddha saw himself really as I think he's described himself as a physician or a doctor, and he formulated a diagnosis and a cure for human suffering. So the first noble truth represented this analysis of universal suffering, which was, how long ago was the Buddha born?
2,500 years ago.
How many?
2,500.
2,500 years ago. So it's fascinating in a way that what he found true then seems to me to be exactly true now. So the first noble truth he thought of was that there's a fundamental reason why we suffer. The second noble truth was that there is a cause of suffering, and good news on the third noble truth is that there's a remedy, and fourth was that there's a practical way to apply this remedy, and that was, or is, the Eightfold Noble Path. Within that Eightfold Noble Path, we, as Zen Buddhists, focus principally on the eighth meditation. But something that I think is really important to emphasize is that all the noble truths are prefixed by the word right. And it seems to me that the overriding one we look at is right view, because if we have a right view, then everything else fits into place. And right view carries with it the idea of right and wrong, which would be in contradiction to the normal teaching, of unitive consciousness rather than dualistic consciousness. But this right view, anybody idea what is a right view? Clear view, good, yeah, excellent, yeah, clear.
So is it the right view at the right time? So one view may be different from the other time.
Yeah, the right view is appropriate to the situation, yeah? Is that what you meant, yeah? Yeah, right view is appropriate to the situation, yeah. Is that why we call it no view? Because it's no particular view? Right? That's right. It's not a fixed view. It's an open, unprejudiced view, which enables us to see things, as Neil says, clearly, or see things as they are. So from that perspective, we don't close our eyes to the suffering around us, of other people, and our own. And at the same time, we intrinsically understand that suffering arises out of our own being. It starts with us. So we choose to actively live according to the Eightfold Noble Path in order to relieve suffering and to for ourselves and for other folk, essentially. And equally, we're doing Jukai tonight. The 3 people who are receiving Jukai, and Jukai is a similar thing, really. It's a statement of your decision that the Buddha's path that your well-being, your happiness will be alleviated or increased, or whatever adjective we wish, by choosing to follow the precepts, or choosing to aspire to follow the precepts, since all of us fail every day. So when we take Jukai or receive Jukai, we're actually aligning ourselves with the realization the Buddha had and the remedy for the reduction or relief of suffering that he came up with. It doesn't mean that you're demonstrating any allegiance to me, or even in a way to the tradition. It's a personal choice that you believe that that by making a public declaration that this is the path that you wish to follow, that you will reduce suffering and, let's say, increase happiness. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Increase happiness as well. So the very basic message of Buddha Dharma is that suffering and negative conditions originate within ourselves. And that equally within us is a powerful potential to overcome this and to actualize a life of compassion and beneficial activity. So there's the kind of the bare bones of why we're here and what this tradition is based on. There's a lot of talk around nirvana and enlightenment and these ideas and concepts that a lot of us carry and sometimes have I think misunderstand. But the Buddha really didn't give much truck to all that stuff. He was very clear. He had a clear psychological insight, which was that in the absence of greed, anger and ignorance, we would be happier. It's that simple. In the absence of greed, anger and ignorance, we would be happier. And within this tradition, we aspire to realizing this state of being. So we become free of the 3 poisons. And it's a lifelong job. So we aspire to experience a state of being that is clear and natural. And if we can get in touch with it, then it's both ungraspable and timeless, and it's really hard to talk about. And so to sum it up from a human perspective, we embrace all our own humanness and all its limitations and difficulties, and we still see them as empty. So even emptiness can still hurt. And and bring joy. And my pragmatic experience, and I can't really explain it, but I've talked about it before, this tradition and this practice, I think from the outside, and often the way I talk about it or people talk about it, it can seem a bit of a kind of miserable pastime, And yet, in ways that are hard to describe, the truth is that when we do get in touch with this unconditioned part of ourselves, then what seems to arise is definitely an experience that is joyful, poignant as well. It's poignant as well. It's not, and I think in other traditions or in other cultures or in other ways of talking about it, the way people experience it, for example, the way Sufis talk about it, this ground of being, and that's also a tricky thing, because we all want to attach to this ground of being as being something, but it isn't in any way that we can talk about. But love is definitely the way it's described in some cultures and some traditions, when we experience this groundless or emptiness or free of the self, which is interesting. So, although it seems to be a kind of, we talk about emptiness and it's abstract and it doesn't sound very juicy or very emotional, certainly in practice all those emotions do arise. Otherwise for me, I wouldn't see any point in being here, and I wouldn't want to persuade you to be here either. It was this kind of cold impermanence, no self feeling that can be upsetting. So on that basis, I thought I'd just talk about emptiness, or anatta is it anatta the Sanskrit word?
Anatta, yeah.
Anatta.
Well, shunyata is emptiness. Anatta is
Anatta is no self.
anatomy. Yes, no self. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, emptiness and no self is very interesting. Yeah. Is there a difference? An interesting discussion there. Anyway, the Buddha uses this phrase, anatta. And so I noticed yesterday Tony was talking about Manjushri.
Manjushri.
What is that? Manjushri. Is that a conscious decision? Interested?
Well, what did you say?
Manjushri.
Manjushri. Well, I don't know.
Manjushri.
maybe I was just stuck.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons that when I started this practice, I was involved for a time with Tibetan Buddhism, and I finally couldn't stay in it because I couldn't pronounce any of the names. This was always much simpler, name-wise. Anyway, the Buddha uses this term, anatta, to indicate that this sense of self that we all powerfully have is a fabricated and conditioned reality. It doesn't have any lasting existence outside of our invested belief in it, which we all have an invested belief in our own existence, understandably. But the problems arise when this sense of me becomes an image, a story that I need to defend, protect, maintain, even at all facts to the contrary. I decide to maintain and sustain this image. I remember when I used to do Munros. I only ever did them in the winter. Didn't ever do them in the summer, but I only say we did them in the winter because then as anybody that knows Scotland, and Bob certainly will know, that if you're not a good map reader and you're doing the Munros in winter, you're really putting yourself at risk I used to always travel with two guys. One was called Gerald and one was called Mark. And Gerald is now the leader of a mountain rescue team in North Wales, so he's really good. And he was always the guy, we used to call him the compass, because he had this intrinsic awareness of where he was. But one day we were out and we'd left the spot, and Mark and I were both sure we were going the wrong way. And Gerald was absolutely convinced he was going the right way. And he was right to be, because he always did go the right way. But in this particular instance, after about an hour of walking in deep snow, we arrived back at the place where we'd had lunch. And we teased him a lot, of course. But, you know, all of us do that in our lives. We have this idea, you know, we're convinced that our mapping is correct. And even though our mapping keeps leading us to the wrong place, keeps leading us back to a place that we already know and have been before, and it's, you know, we know it's unsatisfactory, but we think if we follow the map once again and come back to this once again place, that things will change. And they don't. It's the same place you had lunch as it was for us. So you bear in mind that your story is a story, and you don't need to keep following it. So this no self, this that the Buddha talked about as one of the marks of being. There's no center to it. It's timeless. It occupies no place. There's no separation. But it does not mean that there is not a self or not existing, which is a mind bender. You know, we neither have a self nor do we not have a self. When we try to pin it down and fix it in the way we talked about right view, we're always wrong. If we try and fix what this self is or what the self isn't, we will eventually find ourselves stuck and have to move on. So Buddhism basically is an attempt to investigate this question, this profound question of whether my sense or your sense of separation is a misperception of an unconditioned underlying reality. Is your sense of self a misconception? And if you decide that it is, then, you know, this personal tale, this personal story we all have, you know, which often includes, the things that bother us, you know, joy and happiness doesn't bother us. So it's hard to talk about that side. I'd just take it for granted that you're okay over there. But when the tale involves conflict and pain and drama, if we discover that it's predicated on the basis of an isolated self, a personal self, a separate I, if we discover that that premise is incorrect, what does that mean about all the laws of reality that we operate from? I mean, it's a life changer if you really do realise that. You can really kind of embody that this story, my story, your story, my idea that I exist as a separate, isolated human being. If we really question that, then it is going to bring a revolutionary change to your life, which is what the Buddha realised. You know, which is why it was a big thing. It was a big deal when he had that realisation. So we might understand this intellectually, and you might agree with me intellectually. It might, you know. However, if you do only know it intellectually and not experientially, which is what, you know, sesshin is about and sitting is about, to know this experientially. If you only know it intellectually, what happens is we slip into what Trungpa calls spiritual materialism. So we will start to ask questions, we'll devise techniques of ways out of this trap, ways to address and resolve the suffering that we feel. When we do that intellectually, what we actually do is compound the problem. Because the sense of self, if it's only the sense of self or the ego, and I don't want to give the sense of self or ego a bad name, because they're both essential, but if they're misguided, what the sense of self loves to do is manage its own dissolution. It loves to manage its own dissolution. Of course, it's always thinking, when it comes to the crunch, I'll be in charge. I won't finally dissolve myself, and I will then be in a position of power, if you like. You know, I haven't really surrendered. I've kind of limboed underneath the bar, but I haven't really gone under the bar. So it's a tricky number, you know. It's tricky. Anybody who's tried. In fact, if there is dissolution of the self, then it is only dissolved in its own absence. So there's a paradox that you can't, finally you're going to come up against the wall. And all of us, when we've sat for quite a long time, or even if you sit intensely, if your hair's been on fire and you've sat really in a focused way, you finally will come up to this place where fear arises, because suddenly you're looking at a black hole of dissolution of the self. The self thinks it's a black hole. It thinks, oh, I don't want to go down there, I don't like the look of that, and it will back off. And that's okay, I backed off many times. But finally, either gradually or suddenly, there is the possibility of having the experience of no self. And I was thinking the other day, what it feels a bit like, I don't know, I think this is a common experience, when you're kind of in a half-sleep state, and or it's when you lie down, and it feels like your whole body wants to flip. Does anybody know that one? It's like a dizzy feeling, but you don't want to make the flip. You think if I make the flip, I'll lose it, you know. But when you do, it's okay. You know, you're still in bed, you're still alive. Nothing's changed a lot. So this 100-foot pole, which is the metaphor, one of the metaphors, it can be used as a metaphor, there's other ways of looking at it. Only to the small self feels like a 100-foot pole. It's actually maybe only a foot off the ground. And you're still on the pavement, and you're still fine, you're still functioning your life. You're still a pain in the arse to somebody. Nothing that changes that much. So, what seems to happen when you do, let me say as well that all these experiences can be small or large, big, but they will pass, and you will return to being, an identified, preoccupied, ordinary self again. But at least you've had a look in through the door, and there's a kind of inspiration and catalyst there to carry on. And my own understanding and my own experience is what happens, and perhaps why some of you are here, and whilst you're on your way here, you had some resistance to coming, and you may even have resistance to being here even now, which usually evaporates, but you can have that resistance, is that once we open this door, even very slightly, that part of our nature is no longer prepared to be ignored. It wants to be known. It's like, the Sufis call it a treasure that wants to be known. And that treasure is not going to give you any peace until at least you allow it to be known more. So, I'm always very careful when people want to start practice. I do completely understand why traditionally people who wanted to start practice were dissuaded, even physically dissuaded, even beaten and sent away. Because once we start this practice, it does make demands on us, on our lives. And we need to address it. And if we don't address it, we can put it aside, and then it will at some point down the line, it will knock on the door again. It will knock from the other side this time. In the Christian terms, knock on the door, it will be open. But once you've opened the door, my experience is that whatever's on that other side, that's knocking as well now, and wants to be opened, doesn't want to be ignored. And what seems to happen when this no self is experienced fully, and this is the peculiar, which is why it's in grassroots and why I started to talk about, is that all the things that we imagine or endow the spiritual life with, like joy or love or compassion, when the self-image diminishes and abates, these things seem to arise in the space. And I don't know why they do, but that seems to be what happens. And then of course they fade away because the self starts to make demands again. And that's okay, it's life, it's human, it's what we are, and both sides of the coin are needed. But the interesting thing, why is emptiness such an important teaching certainly in Mahayana Buddhism, in this tradition? And it does seem that emptiness opens the door to a qualitatively different kind of experience, and a different kind of. I get a bit sick of myself using the word compassion. It gets a bit smelly. I don't know what else to use really. But kindness, let's say kindness. I like that more. Yeah. Kindness doesn't manifest and arise in the way that we think of it. It more arises in the way of being present. Of being present to your life and of being present to other people's lives. It's not like a conscious decision that I'm going to be a good person, or I guess it's because emptiness frees us from the concerns of who we are and what we are, and it also frees us. If it is a true emptiness experience, then it also frees us of any care about what anybody else thinks about us. Which is a great relief. And that's why, because it is being present, and it isn't predicated on any fixed view about the way to be. It's why this tradition is sometimes questioned, because there's no fixed moral code. Because if you're present, the way you choose to act is not going to be limited by your or mine previous understanding of what is moral and what is immoral. Of course, this way of looking at things and this stance can be misused, and it has been misused. It's been misused in the Buddhist tradition as much as it's been used in any other tradition. And that's, it's really worth noting and being aware of, that because somebody's had, big or small enlightenment or opening experience, it doesn't mean that they're suddenly intrinsically wise. They can still behave badly. So you've got to be careful. And in fact, I've written down here that one Buddhist philosopher said that emptiness is the exhaustion of all theories and views. The exhaustion of all theories and views. So emptiness, so the experience of emptiness is you have to throw away all your concepts, all your ideas, all your views. And one practical, if you like, way of understanding the relative, or the small self and emptiness, is that the small self represents our character, our nature, who we are, if you like, who we think we are and how people experience us. And I hadn't realised this, but the word for character in Latin, the root of the word for character in Latin means over and over. So your character is formed by what you do over and over and over. And it's a bit like the mapping analogy. You follow the same route, even if every time it leads to the same place that you don't want to be. That hasn't worked in the past, but you still keep going back to it. Over and over and over, you follow the same groove, then your nature and your character is going to be formed by that. And then on the other side, and this is, I have to keep prefacing this, there aren't two sides, there's only one side, but so I can talk about it, I'm dividing it. The other side, the side of emptiness, or no thingness, that's the side that preserves the possibility of change. So you can change, there is a part of your nature that's empty that does allow change. So your identity doesn't become a fixed self, and over creation out of your own actions and behaviour. No thingness cannot be fixed, obviously. So we all have this potential to change. So that brings me on to the question of change. And I hope that you know that this path, this tradition, isn't telling you to change and become a more polished version of who you already are. A nicer, shinier, better version of who you are. In order to be have more well-being, more happy. That's not what it's about. It's about, and this is the scary bit, it's about deconstructing the self in order to target the very cause of unhappiness. What is the bottom line? This tradition is not about rearranging all the candlesticks, the plates, the knives and forks on top of the table. It's about pulling the tablecloth out from under them all. They call it. It's a short razor's edge path. And happily for me, you can also do it slowly. You can do it slowly, but what we're really going for is the very root of suffering. We can do all the analysis, but finally, what is the root? So we're intending, hope is to bring about a change in perspective, a change of heart, if you like. and to allow the qualities that we talked about earlier of kindness and joy and love. I don't want to sound a bit like a Christian preacher, you know, I think it's going to be great. But that allows us to manifest, and hopefully will bring some humour as well. For me, that's really important, because from one perspective, I mean, I completely understand why there's this idea of the big belly laugh. You know, that was what it was all about. So your very own life, your very own existence, is the subject of the journey. And I think that's really fantastic, that your very own life is the subject of the journey. Because that both carries with it a raison d'etre and the understanding that you intrinsically have the tools for the change that you may wish to make. You've got them. You can write anything you like on your own canvas. And what may surprise you, and what would seem, I think, to most people, just not true, the impermanence and recognizing that the future is uncertain is the way to happiness, and not vice versa. I mean, we all imagine it's the other way around, don't we? You know, we can really secure ourselves and find a good pension, have a good partner, the right climate, the best house, or a good house. You know, all the things that the world tells us will bring us happiness. What this tradition is saying is that embracing impermanence and recognizing the future is uncertain is the way to greater well-being. Was that a side path? So in this emptiness, this world of emptiness, which I think could be called, Tony's more erudite than me, but if we call it the noumenal world, would that be acceptable, do you think? The noumenal world, the world of emptiness, it's not normally called emptiness, but this noumenal world, everything is linked and everything is connected. Even if in appearance, objects and people are seen as separate and distinct, both are true. And this is why I wanted to emphasize that the sense of self and distinctions and separation and duality are really important, because distinctions are important in allowing us to function, you know, in telling us, you know, it's not a good idea to feel an experience of oneness with a moving bus. Good. I think there's an American phrase which is, good fences make good neighbours. So you need to create your own boundaries within which you feel happy, but in which you're not imprisoned. So the practice is finally about you becoming the person that essentially you are. And who are you essentially? You know, what is I will ask you a bit later on about those basic questions I asked at the very beginning of Sesshin. What is your essential nature? What is the essential way of being that really works for you, that really allows you to express all your talents and allows you also to feel and know all the sadness and joys as well? What is that? What does that look like? You know, can you unpick that? Can you get there? Or are you going to be preoccupied and caught up and trapped and imprisoned even by digging soft sand, you know, and it all pours back into the hole. You keep doing the same thing over and over again, following the same patterns, having the same ideas, being really determined that this time you will make it work for you. Or can you make a radical change? Or even can you make a subtle change? Even a little teeny change can create a whole set of new circumstances. Oh God, how can I have been? I just wanted to say something about happiness. I didn't realise it was 10 to 1. I haven't even got started on my staple sellotape stuff, yes?
Okay, we've got all day.
This you know, this view that I hammer on about, and the tradition hammers on about, and maybe you talk to yourself about, about just the self being a delusion. Many people in many different traditions, not just religious traditions, but literary traditions, philosophical traditions, have all come to the same view. So I've just written down here a quote that I read from Iris Murdoch from a book called The Nice and the Good, which Gav may have read. Have you read that, Gav? No, you've read a lot, but you haven't read. You remember Iris Murdoch? Yes. The film was made about her, who died of Alzheimer's. She says, she writes it in a very literary way, but we can short circuit it. She says, happiness is a matter of one's most ordinary, everyday mode of being, e.g. being busy and lively, and unconcerned with the self. She says happiness is about being busy, lively, and being unconcerned with the self. She says, to be damned is for one's ordinary everyday mode of consciousness to be one of unremitting, agonizing preoccupation with the self. So you said exactly the same thing, If you can, I feel a fraud saying this, by the way, because I get just as caught up and argumentative and preoccupied with myself as everyone else, but it really helps me to say it, and I hope it helps you for me to say it, that our preoccupation with the self definitely doesn't work. Finally, we've got to do it, we do have to be preoccupied until we've kind of deconstructed and rooted out all the things that are on an ongoing basis bothering us. But finally, to walk freely around on the earth without being too fretful, the diminishment of the sense of self definitely helps. And Emily Dickinson, is it Dickinson? Yeah, Dickinson, not Dixon. Emily Dickinson says, don't miss anything, everything, everyone counts. Find out what this means. Do what it wants of you. Do what it wants of you. So when Tony was talking yesterday about allowing the 10,000 things in, that's exactly what she's saying. Allow the 10,000 things in, and they will do with you what they want to do with you, but pragmatically what seems to happen is it's better than what we want to do with ourselves. Which is a strange business. The whole thing is surreal. Okay. I'll spare you anymore. any more browbeating.
It's amazing somebody like Emily Dickinson got that kind of wisdom.
Yeah.
And her poems are full of it. And she spent most of her life indoors.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah. Yeah. So, I did want to ask you, where's those questions? I've got lots of ones to say at the end. Issue reminded me of the 10+1 sentences I wrote about notes on the way, and I've actually got a copy of it here. And when I read it, I thought, God, did I write that? That's pretty good. I won't bother you with it. So, does anybody? What were the 3 questions? What makes you feel most alive? What are the inner and outer barriers, or what do you cling to internally and externally in your life? And what was the third? Anyone remember?
What gives your life meaning?
Pardon?
What is it that gives your life meaning?
Oh yeah, what is it? Thank you. What gives your life meaning? Does anybody want to share with us any conclusion to any of those 3 questions?
I think after what you just said, I'd be worried about, that what you think will make you happy won't, and let the 10,000 things in, and they'll probably know the answer far better than I will.
Yeah, well, whatever I say, there's always another side. It's true, we can only ever talk about one side at a time. So I hope I don't want you to feel depressed by that.
I don't feel depressed.
So, yeah. Thank you. So none of you came to any view of conclusion, or you're far too shy to tell us in
I've got
public.
the questions within minutes of you saying them.
Can I say something? What makes me feel most alive, I found was the one that I focused on, and that's been a good question for a long time in my life. And what I felt was that it was to do with connectedness rather than separation.
Yeah.
For me. Although there are risks, which is the whole point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I
Thank you.
agree. I feel, for me, what makes me feel most happy is when I smile and connect to all the people I've smiled at, connected with this week, and then they smile back. That, for me, I think, that's a real...
That's very nice. You've got a very nice smile as well, Tim. Oh, you have. Lovely smile.
You never stops laughing, do you, Tim?
Alistair's got his hand up.
Pardon?
Alistair's got his hand up.
Oh, I was sorry, I can't see.
Just to respond to Miranda and Tim, that one of the other things you had was inner barriers.
Yeah.
And I think one of my inner barriers is kind of the flip of that, which is being concerned about what other people think a lot,
Yeah.
And I think that kind of stymies connection because of that sort of paranoia, it all becomes stilted. And
I agree, you can see that. When you smile at somebody properly, if they are kind of closed off, sometimes the response can be, why is he smiling at me?
Yeah.
And that, exactly. Weeks after. And then sometimes when they're brave, they break that and they smile back. And that's a really intimate moment, I think, for me. Or they're drunk.
This is such a universal feeling. I remember when I used to do Big Mind workshops, the voice that everybody immediately loved and wanted to be in was the voice of fuck it. Fuck it.
Oh.
It's such a relief, to not maintain some front that you don't feel comfortable with.
Sorry, Sensei, what was that? Your voice?
Not to make. So I couldn't hear you. You couldn't hear me. We could go on.
The voice of bucket. Yeah.
so tiring having to maintain a front. Really tiring.
That's what happens when you're worried about what other people
Exactly.
think. Constant fronts.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's a complete waste of energy.
Yeah. And it's relieving to be with folk who don't, because at least you know where you stand. Yeah. Sorry, Colin.
No, I was just continuing on that thing of, you know, the internal and external boundaries for me. I think what I've come to this week is that I don't actually think there are any external boundaries. And like what Emma was talking about, that there are certain limitations, like, you know, I'm not free to not die, I'm not free to fly, things like that. And I certainly know that because of having a body, my life is limited. But just because there's a limit in one direction doesn't mean that in another direction there isn't some vast space that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
But there are, you know, I have felt the internal boundaries or limits, and come up against them.
Thank you. And then what you said is absolutely right. You know, when we are imprisoned, or in whatever way, you know, mildly or powerfully, we actually have no idea how vast the horizons are. You know, a guy who's in jail, for him, freedom is being out of the jail and maybe having a house to live in and a partner to be with and a job, which we've all got. So his vision of freedom is not as great. You know, the world is vast and wide. Okay.
Can I say something?
Sorry, go.
What Tim was saying about smiling, I think that's good, but I think it's also nice to be able to sort of be grumpy, because there's an inner freedom in that as well.
Of course, yeah.
And it's, if someone smiles at you and you don't feel like smiling, and you smile, then it doesn't feel right.
No.
So it's kind of always changing.
Yeah. So what would you if somebody, you know, seemed to be authentically smiling and you were feeling in a bad mood, what would you do?
When I'm here, it's much easier to be who I am sometimes. I could be, if someone smiles at me and I smile back, it wouldn't feel right if I was feeling grumpy. So I could be grumpy. So I don't have to put on a persona of smiling because someone else is smiling at me. And I don't mean to be rude.
Even if you experience it as an authentic smile rather than like a kind of hail hearty, you know, it's a lovely day kind of automatic.
Sometimes it's hard to know if someone smiles authentic or not. I don't know.
I suppose I'm just talking subjectively, because I'm sure you've all had this, particularly after Sesshin. I might go into a newsagent where the guy's always bloody miserable, you know, can barely be bothered to get you what you want. And if I go in and I'm full of beans and I'm kind of feeling spacious after Sesshin, oddly enough, he seems to respond. So I think there is the possibility of reciprocation, but absolutely on your side. That if you want to be grumpy, you should be allowed to be. Yeah. Nothing worse than being falsely optimistic or happy, is there? Sorry, Ellen.
That's what John was saying about the difference between pity and compassion, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Difference, yeah.
Sensei, funnily enough, she gave me one of the most lovely smiles this week while she was doing that banging on the drum thing.
Karen's Scottish, you know, we have to allow her to be. She's from northern climes. Doing this is allowed.
Good.
The person behind you she was smiling at.
Sorry, Emma, let's finish with you.
I think that if somebody smiles, even if I'm miserable and I feel it's genuine, there's some reaction, but if it's a genuine open smile, then they'll react to me as well.
Yeah.
And it has to be both ways, and if they're smiling and I'm not smiling and they keep smiling, it's like, well, where's the empathy?
Yeah.
The connection.
Yeah.
I'm stressed out now. Don't I?